Hello, my name is Randy Spalding, Executive Director for the Washington State Board of Education. Welcome to this discussion on career readiness and work integrated learning. In Washington, as in many other states, state agencies, schools, private sector employers, and non-government organizations are working together to design the next generation of work integrated learning experiences and programs to ensure students have the skills they need to enter well-paying jobs and or continue their education. Thank you for joining us today for the first in a two-part webinar exploring the experiences in 7 states as we consider innovative approaches to work integrated learning such as youth apprenticeship, internships, and career and technical education. This webinar builds on work supported by a grant from NASBE looking at state boards' role in career readiness. Today, we will hear from Indiana, Louisiana, Virginia, and Washington. Tomorrow, we will hear from Colorado, Delaware, Kentucky, and again from Washington. We will have brief presentations from each state, followed by discussions among the panelists. You're welcome to submit questions during the conversation using the comment box. And as Tony mentioned a few minutes ago, we do ask that participants keep their microphones muted during the webinar. At this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Amundsen, who is President and CEO of the National Association of State Boards of Education.
Thanks so much, Randy, and welcome to everyone for this very exciting and innovative approach to finding the best resources across the country and then bringing them to help and support an individual state board. NASBE has been very excited and very happy to support the state of Washington and your State Board of Education in the work that you all have been doing. And it is also made possible because of a very generous grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So we're extremely grateful to all of them. I know that you're going to learn a lot today. You're going to have a chance to maybe have some of your questions answered. And I don't want to take any time from that conversation. So I am pleased to turn it over to a member of both Washington State Board of Education and the NASBE Board of Directors, MJ Bolt, who is going to be the moderator for the day. MJ, good to talk to you. Have a great conversation today.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Randy. Thanks for that nice introduction, and welcome everybody, from across the nation for joining us and joining us today. And thank you to our panelists. We're looking forward to hearing from our different states, as well as hopefully having time at the end to have a rich discussion with some questions and answers. And as Randy said too, we welcome your questions. You can chat those in the chat box as we're going along, or wait towards the end, and hopefully we'll have time for that. So I believe we're starting with hearing from Indiana today, and we're happy to have as presenters Carrie Lively, who is the Director of Apprenticeships and Work-Based Learning at the Indiana Department of Workforce Development, and Beth Meguschar, hopefully I said your name right, Beth, who is Associate Chief for Workforce Education and Training, also at the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. Welcome, Carrie and Beth, take it away. Do we have Carrie and Beth with us?
It looks like we may not have them at the moment. So let's skip forward to the next our next presenters.
Okay, so we'll check back with Carrie and Beth here, and hopefully they'll be signed on soon. So we're going to move on to Louisiana. So hopefully Louisiana friends are queued up and ready. We've got with us today Lefty, Lefkowith, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Education, and and as well as Susie Schowen, who's also joining us today, who's the Director of Force Initiatives at the Louisiana Economic Development Fast Start Program. And I don't believe Ken Bradford is with us today, could join us, but we've got Lefty and Susie. So thank you.
Can you hear me? This is Dave Lefkowith.
I can hear you, Dave.
Okay, I hear a little bit of reverb, so I'll try to talk softer. My name is Dave Lefkowith. I am one of the two co-leads of Jumpstart. The other is Ken Bradford. Ken is the brains behind the outfit, but you got the good-looking one, got a face for radio. And with me is one of our key allies, Susie Schowen from the Louisiana Economic Development Department, because one of the tenets, probably the driving tenet of Louisiana's Jumpstart program, is to align our career and technical education with the state's economic development strategies. So if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to make the presentation, but I'm going to cue Susie when it's her opportunity to make some questions. Jumpstart was created, and by the way, I'm going to go through these slides with a degree of haste because they will be available to all viewers. And then if you have any questions or would like any of our resources, you can contact us, and the ways to contact us are on the last slide. 81% of our students in Louisiana didn't go on to attain a four-year, that should be a four-year college degree. There's a typo there. Didn't go on to attain a four-year college degree. And historically, they graduated high school not qualifying for the high-wage careers and the high-demand industry sectors that drive our state's economy. Over the course of several years, we, with a bunch of other stakeholders across the state, created the Jumpstart program. It's a high school diploma pathway that provides students with an academic foundation. They're literate, numerate problem solvers, but they also must attain industry certifications and demonstrate workplace soft skills in order to graduate high school. We're the only state to require students to attain industry promulgated industry-based credentials, or IBCs, in order to graduate. And that's the third point. These IBCs must have employability value. In other words, they must help students attain entry-level employment. We also created a policy of accountability parity. So schools and districts in our state get letter grades. Now they get equal credit towards their letter grades for top-level accomplishments for Jumpstart or for academic preparation for college. So a student will earn the same amount of points for his or her school and district by getting an advanced welding certification or an advanced manufacturing certification through LED's certification for manufacturing program, as a student who gets a 5 on an AP test. We've also created dedicated funding sources for career technical education. Among them is our Career Development Fund, where districts can earn $238 per student per course credit for courses that are on a list of courses aligned to these high-demand IBCs. And schools can earn an unlimited amount of incremental CTE funding. There's no limit to it, and it's constitutionally guaranteed. We believe strongly that's an industry best practice. Lastly, we believe in robust student choice with over 40 pathways created by industry, educators, and government agencies. And this is where I'm going to hand it over to Susie, because the types of pathways that we offer are aligned to our state's economic development strategy. And I'd like Susie to expound on that a little bit.
Thank you very much for the handoff, Lefty. And I do want to really emphasize to everybody the importance that we see in involving economic development partners or people who can at least play that role. Because just as Lefty said, it's very important that we align our workforce development strategies to the needs of the employers and the future needs of the employers that we anticipate in the state. And I think we all know that there's a lot of employers that are really eager and willing to come to the table, and that's fantastic. And we never want to turn our enthusiastic partners away in any way. But they don't always represent the highest wage, highest growth pathways that are available in the state, and therefore don't always represent the best opportunities available to our young people. So if we're really going to do right by them, we need to make sure that we have the right industry partners at the table. And it's the economic development organizations that can help to identify which industries they belong to and who the workforce partners that really need to be at the table are, and then persuade them that they're going to get the value that they need to get in order to dedicate their time to it. So we think that that's an absolutely critical component to identify those economic driver industries, make sure that the representatives are there, and make sure that there's a balanced perspective when you've got your employer partners around the table. Thanks, Lefty.
All right, Susie. Next slide, please. Early on during the Jumpstart implementation, we realized that there were a bunch of challenges in expanding WBL, workplace-based learning. First is horribly unequal access for students in rural schools, students in alternative school programs who we horribly underserve, and I suspect are underserved in other states as well. And students with disabilities all have historically had limited or no access to WBL. We also noticed that on-site WBL opportunities require significant support by counselors and teachers. And the kindest way to state that is that that support isn't necessarily available at all high schools, even if it's promised and expected. There's a limited industry selection for WBL. So even in areas that have large employers willing to host internships, it may be that the kid who goes to high school in that area isn't interested in that local employer. What do you do for those kids? There are transportation barriers even for schools with robust WBL programs. There's one district in our state that has thousands of students participating, but they have to provide their own transportation. So it really economically limits those students who can participate. And our concern really is that WBL as practice, say, for example, through apprenticeships, simply exacerbates access and equity gaps. I mean, apprenticeships are great for the students and companies involved, but they're only available in certain districts, typically districts with a greater concentration of high-wage employers, which means that those students who don't live in those areas, the majority of students, are even more disadvantaged. Next slide, please. So we've decided to create access and equity in WBL through three methods. One is by using technology. We use online technology to enable students to engage with workplace experts in every industry sector they're interested in exploring. And the key here is to provide teachers with instructional resources so that every interaction between a student and an industry expert reinforces key academic communications and workplace skills. This isn't just a day in the park. These are challenging academic exercises that students participate in, not only to learn about these employment opportunities, but also to practice key skills. We also use the summer. We have a Jumpstart Summers program, which was piloted last summer for 250 students. This year, there'll be over 2,000 students participating statewide that provide students with on-site workplace-based learning, which is possible even in remote communities outside the normal school schedule, because kids can get on a bus and go 90 minutes if they need to, and come back 90 minutes in the summer. But every Jumpstart Summer program also is required to include three other components. One is students must attain industry-based credentials. Second is students must earn academic credits. And three, they must receive a summer wage. So as you can imagine, this is a very popular program, all funded through public education funding, with some matching grants, cash, and in-kind from employers. But the dominant funding source is public education. And then lastly, we train educators. Every summer, we have a Super Summer Institute, which offers teachers the opportunity to get industry-based credentials, which by policy, a teacher in Louisiana must hold the IBC that they're going to help their students attain. We're now also experimenting with virtual training. So this is the universe of from least engaged students to most engaged students. This is the universe of WBL opportunities we see in Louisiana. Quite frankly, our original contribution is on the first several through simulated workplaces where we're trying to use technology, summer, and trained educators to create greater equity for WBL. Next slide, please. And this last slide is very busy, but on the left side, it shows the types of educator training and support, the green column, which is comprehensive CTE leader training through a CTE Leadership Academy. We have online modules about workplace-based learning. It's modules 1.08. If you go online, you can participate in all those modules. And the email is www.lacteleaders.com. We have the summer training that I spoke about. We have online and in-person training on the NEPRIS platform, which is our virtual platform we use to engage with industry experts. You can contact us about that or NEPRIS directly. We use third-party intermediaries to provide support on specific initiatives. For example, the Louisiana Council for Economic Education is supporting our efforts to engage students with disabilities with workplace-based learning. And then you can always just email any question to jumpstart@la.gov, or you can contact me directly. I'm like Cher or Bono. I only need one name. I'm Lefty@la.gov. In addition to those educator training and support resources on the right-hand side, you'll see that we have those specific types of instructional resources that we think bring value and rigor to workplace-based learning, even if it's virtual workplace-based learning. The micro-industry engagement activities that we're doing in Louisiana, I think, are groundbreaking, and you can read all about them in the resources indicated there. We are working with an organization called Big Picture Learning to automate the WBL administration processes over cell phones, while also using the cell phone technology as a way for students to explore internship opportunities. You can contact me about that pilot, and I can get you in contact with Big Picture Learning. We have created virtual workplace experience courses that help students complete hands-on projects in all of the industry sectors that Susie's organization has told us will drive our state's future prosperity. We have the Jumpstart Summers program and the resources for students with disabilities. So that's a very quick presentation of that slide, but it is available to everybody and you can use all those links. Next slide, please. Let me end here. We are always happy to help. All of our resources are open source resources available for free download and unlimited use at no fee. You can contact jumpstart@la.gov or contact me directly at lefty@la.gov or call me on my personal cell. Open 24 hours a day, 3 chairs, no waiting, happy to help. View, all children as our children, not just Louisiana's children. So if there's any way we can help you, we'll be happy to do it. Susie, any final comments?
No, I think I'm good. Great job as always, Lefty.
Yes, I pay Susie a lot of money for those comments. So we're done. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and apologizing, we are having a few technical difficulties. This is Randy, and jumping in for MJ, who's having some connection issues as well. We are going to loop back to Carrie and Beth, who I think are connected now. Is that right?
I believe so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
It works.
So let's take it away, Indiana.
Okay, well, I do want to apologize for Beth not being in attendance. If you heard the most recent school shooting at Noblesville High School, Beth and I both worked there previously, and her daughter was actually involved in the classroom where that took place. So she is spending the day with her youngest daughter, who's having a hard time going back to school today. So I'm taking it for both of us, but at the end of our conversation, Beth and I are both in this wheelhouse with the Department of Workforce Development in Indiana, and would be, I'll echo what Lefty said, that anything that we can do to help answer questions or whatever regarding, what comes out of this, we're both willing to do that. So moving forward, I'm Carrie Lively. I'm the Director of Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning with the Department of Workforce Development. My office has been newly created by our governor's executive order that's going to stand up my office with the intention of supporting registered apprenticeships, as well as a state apprenticeship, which we're calling a state earn and learn model, and also helping to expand work-based learning across the state. Beth is involved in education and training with the workforce development as well, and so our efforts together kind of complement each other. Work-based learning opportunities across the state. Next slide, please. All right, so as I had mentioned, my office is kind of stood up to do three major things to support registered apprenticeships, as well as a state earn and learn and work-based learning. And it was also set up through an executive order from our governor to respond to our new graduation pathways. So recently, the state of Indiana has changed what we are considering an eligible series of courses and experiences for students graduate high school. And I can talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So those of you familiar with the DLL Registered Apprenticeships, where my niche comes in is I'm really partnering with K-12 education to make this happen. My work at Noblesville High School, we kind of broke outside of the traditional school perspective, and we started to offer apprenticeships and work-based learning opportunities for our students while in high school. And those are the 5 components of what a DLL Registered Apprenticeship, business involvement, OJT, related instructions, the progressive wage, and then also leading to a national occupational credential. The next slide will show you what we are considering a state registered earn and learn. So you can see those 5 components are very similar. The focus of a state earn and learn is that we are building programs so that students are able to complete these in their high school time frame, so they can get industry recognized credentials as well as on-the-job training and related instruction without having sometimes the requirement of the 2,000 to 4,000 hours for a registered. There's a lot of competency built in with these models, and a little bit more flexibility for the employer with less kind of oversight in terms of keeping those programs on the eligible training provider list. So those are the difference between the state earn and learn and the registered apprenticeship. And then what we're doing with work-based learning is on the next slide. This is what an earn and learn looks like actually in action. So this is our first earn and learn we've built out with the state. So you can see it in grade 11, a student can go through the Certified Nurses Assistant program. It's a 270-hour training program, which is above and beyond what is expected for the state. I think it's 105 hours for a CNA in a traditional setting. What you'll see what these students are getting along with that is a few extra certifications, phlebotomy, Lean Six Sigma training. And then the second semester of that school year is a work-based learning opportunity for an additional 270 hours. That's followed up by their senior year as getting a QMA, again, 270 hours with the certifications in patient care tech, EKG tech, and then the next level of the Lean Six Sigma with a work-based learning component for the second semester. So students will graduate high school with 10 credits at our state community college, and that will open the door for their future, either going straight into the workforce or continuing into an RN or LPN. I've outlined the coursework below where these pathways, this is what we're developing as a state for all of our students to have a clear aligned pathway from middle school into high school, aligned to a career out of high school. So this is what we're building out across the state. This is just our first example in healthcare to do that. Next slide, please. All right, so with work-based learning, what we're trying to help to communicate across the state is that it's a continuum, that you can get on and off in work-based learning lots of different places, that it's not an event, it's not a college fair or something like that, and we're chalking that up to this is something that falls in line. We're really trying to get people to think of this as a continuum and to understand that some of the activities and the events that are going on in the schools, building on top of each other in a very deliberate manner, can lead to a really robust work-based learning opportunity for students. Next slide, please. So this is the goal. This is what Beth and I do. We are working with primarily schools and industry partners to come together and figure out what each entity needs, so what the school needs and what the employer needs, and figure out how they can come together to meet those needs for each other. So we're hosting workshops and we're developing webinars and opportunities for kind of the hand-holding to happen between employers and the school people. We have a great team in Indiana of insurance providers and people from the Department of Labor and Wage and Hour who are all on board to help kind of debunk some of the myths as to why students can't be on the shop floor or why students can't do certain things. So we have a great team of people who are helping to kind of break down some of the barriers and some of the misconceptions as to what can and can't happen. Next slide, please. And so this is what we're building out, again, across the state is just a continuum. This falls in line with our graduation pathways, that each student to graduate high school now, of course, they're going to have to complete the expected number of high school courses, so your core courses as well as your electives. In Indiana, you have to have 40 credits to graduate high school. And then in addition, a student has to meet kind of one of these three buckets. So they have to have an experience of either project-based learning, an experience of work-based learning, or an experience of community service-based learning. So those three are tacked onto the original graduation requirements. No longer do students have to pass an exam in order to graduate high school, but they have to show and demonstrate that they have employability skills. And we're building that out now as a state. So that's not really clear. I know that our school people are having a hard time with that. This is starting with our 7th grade class, our current class of 7th graders. So we are fine-tuning that and getting information out to the field as quickly as possible, but making sure that we're talking with all interested parties to make sure that everybody's on the same page there. Next slide, please. And these were Beth's slides, so I apologize. I just kind of explained that. So if any of you here have any support for any of these types of measuring what project-based, service-based, and work-based learning is, that's where we are as a state now, trying to find a way to document and measure. As a former school administrator and school counselor, that was the hardest part, was to make sure that we're tracking all of these things, all the initiatives from the state level. So that's where a lot of the pain point is for our schools, is to figure out how they can develop systems to measure and track that these skills are actually being demonstrated by students. Next slide, please. And this is kind of what our motto is from the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeships, is that we're trying to get students to understand that you can know a lot, but if you can't demonstrate and do things with what you know, then we've missed the mark. So that's our motto. Next slide, please. I think that's the end. Okay, that's my contact and Beth's contact. Sorry for having some technical difficulties at first, but I think I kept it under my 10 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And just as a reminder, there's going to be time for discussion at the end. So we are moving through quickly on the presentations, and then we'll have some conversation at the end. Next, we're going to hear two presentations from Virginia. The first is a presentation from Ann Holton, who's a member of the Virginia Board of Education, visiting professor of education policy at George Mason University, and a former Virginia Secretary of Education.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, good to be with all of you today. And I just want to send out to our Indiana colleagues that our hearts are with you all. And so sorry to hear that situation affected you personally, and hope you know we're all thinking about you. And it's great to hear all the great things going on in Indiana and Louisiana. We all have a lot to learn from each other. Virginia began a process several years ago of implementing what we're calling a profile of a Virginia graduate. And this initiative really started with our governor, and our legislature put it into statute, and it charged our Board of Education with implementing it, starting with defining what are we looking for in our Virginia graduates? What are the skills and competencies our graduates need to be successful as they transition into career and citizenship after high school? And we recognized, as obviously many of you have been recognizing, that we had been focused on content knowledge, but not necessarily focused on the competencies and skills that our students needed to be successful. So moving on to the next slide, we have engaged in a multi-year process, multi-stakeholder. So our Board of Education has done public hearings. We have met with business representatives. We've met with education folks at all levels. It is a process, as I said, that the legislature and the governor's office have been very, very engaged in, as well as I was working on this project when I was Secretary of Education, and now in my role on the Board of Education, and just really asking what do our students need for what comes next. So if you can move on. one of the first criteria that became clear that we needed to do as we implemented this process is we needed to expand the number of performance assessments and reduce the number of credits that were verified by standardized computer-based tests. We here in Virginia, we actually started a test-based verified credit system in Virginia long before the national movement in that direction. We've been doing it longer, and we also do it in more subjects. So in Virginia, we were requiring more. When I started out, we had something like 31 or 32 courses that had to be verified by a test compared to the 17 national ones. And we've been whittling it down towards the national minimum so as to give more room for for subjects that weren't necessarily easily verified by a standardized computer-based test. And meanwhile, we've been expanding our use of performance assessments, which we think help focus on, at the end of this slide, what we're calling the 5 C's of critical thinking, creative thinking, collaboration, communication, and citizenship. At the same time, we recognized we needed to increase opportunities for internships and work-based learning. We needed to increase career exposure, career exploration, and planning. And really that's one of the fundamental things that we've asked our schools to now do, is to think of career exploration as one of the fundamental requirements, expectations of our schools. If you'll move on to the next slide. So this is kind of our slide that defines our portrait of a graduate. We are looking in Virginia for the life-ready individual to have during his K-12 or her K-12 experience, content knowledge, career planning, workplace skills, community and civic responsibility skills. If you can flip on to the next slide. This starts really in elementary school. We have new expectations of elementary schools in the career exposure area. In the middle schools, we now have a required career investigations curriculum. We've had for a while, we've had a requirement that middle schoolers have a career plan that would then help form their high school course requirement plans. But that's been really just kind of a one-off plan and not all that effective, frankly. And so now we are expecting a course or course equivalent to be taught in middle schools that would be a semester-long course in career exploration that would culminate in the student completing a career plan. And then finally, at the high school level, we are emphasizing work-based experiences, performance assessments, industry credentials. Some of what we're doing at the high school are some requirements that are already in place. We in Virginia have a dual diploma system. A student can get either a standard diploma or an advanced diploma. And they're about half and half, and the advanced diploma students are mostly going on to 4-year institutions or community colleges en route to 4-year institutions. But we have focused on giving our, well, first we've added a requirement that all students who get a standard diploma must complete a CTE credential. So Louisiana, we're not requiring everybody to have a CTE credential, but everybody that's getting the standard diploma are required to have a CTE credential. That requirement is already in place. Most of the other requirements I'm talking about are going into effect with the class starting this coming fall. So if you can go to the next slide. Part of what we've been doing is part of, over the last couple of years, and we adopted new regulations that go into effect with the freshman class this fall, has been giving our high schools more scheduling flexibility. We've eliminated the 140 class hour rule. We've reduced the requirements for some of the verified credit requirements that we had before, and then we have added a requirement that all of our high schools offer every student an opportunity for work-based or service-based learning. And then we've adjusted the graduation requirements to make room for that kind of innovation. Next slide, please. I'm going to race through these because I'm over time already, and I want you to hear from my colleague. What's ahead? All these changes are being implemented with the freshman class that starts this fall. We're working still on workplace guidelines for internships and externships, apprenticeships. We're working on more training for our school staff. Go on to the next slide. This is just a picture of one of our jurisdictions, Hampton, excuse me. Our system absolutely is going to require that a lot of different players pitch in to make this work. So businesses, local school boards, local divisions. But Hampton is one of our divisions that's got a lot of Title I schools, a variety of students with different interests, and yet is doing a truly phenomenal job implementing what they're calling the Academies of Hampton, and we can talk more about that later if time permits. Moving on to the next slide. I just wanted to give you one quick glimpse of, I was very pleased to help host an event at George Mason University, where I'm now working in the fall, where we brought I'm now working this past spring. We hosted a conference where we brought together business representatives and K-12 representatives to talk about how we can strengthen school and business partnerships. And I'll tell you, one of the secrets is the chambers of commerce can play key roles in that. And with that, we just have so many different great things going on at in our individual communities that we are hoping are going to help the schools meet these new requirements of offering work-based learning opportunities to all our students. And one of those is this terrific program that one of our community colleges is organizing. And I'll pass off to Charles Britt, who's going to tell you about that.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate the introduction. And yes, I'm here to speak about what we're doing in Northern Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C., to prepare our students for the careers of the future that are, of course, happening and really moving forward here in Northern Virginia. So I'm going to, as she mentioned, sort of move quickly, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation if there are any about what I'm going to present. So if you can move to the next slide. So first, I'm just going to give you a little background about NOVA, as we're called here in the area, Northern Virginia Community College. We are the largest institution of higher education in the Commonwealth of Virginia, with a total population of both part-time and full-time students of 76,000. We have 6 campuses across Northern Virginia. We're a very large region. And across those campuses, we offer 79 two-year degree programs, 16 certificate programs, and a variety of career study certificate programs to prepare students and young adults for the world of work. Our courses here at NOVA are offered on campus and online. And we offer, which is a huge selling point for us, particularly in the DC region, we offer one of the lowest tuitions of any college university in the Washington, DC area. So a little bit about our program, NOVA Systemic. We launched back in May of 2013 as a public-private partnership between the Commonwealth of Virginia and the business community, as Ann mentioned, particularly the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce. We were launched to provide basically a college-wide STEM education outreach program to create a pipeline of qualified graduates to meet the region's growing need for highly skilled STEM professionals. There was research that was done by George Mason University in the Chamber that said by 2020, we would be short, I think my slide needs to go back there, we would be short close to 1 million professionals that would be available to fill some of the STEM-related positions in Northern Virginia, and we would have to do something to quickly scale the work that we were doing in order to meet that demand. So our program started as a way to sort of coordinate and develop the expansion of programs and partnerships, which engage and inspire students to excel in STEM across multiple school districts. So it includes Fairfax County, Loudoun County, Arlington and the city of Alexandria, and also Prince William County. So we work with our counterparts in those school districts and the business community to find ways to engage students to ensure that they're prepared for the workforce. So the program that I'm going to explain today is our summer internship program, which is open to both high school and college students. I think one of our previous presenters mentioned the fact that in some areas you have all these challenges because of lack of resources. Even with the vast amount of resources we have here in Northern Virginia, we still have challenges with ensuring that every student out of the large population that we have gets access to these work-based learning experiences. So one of the ways that we're looking to address that challenge is by offering a summer internship program through through the college. And what we do is we hire students who are in high school or college who have taken courses or a background in STEM. For the most part, we're talking about students who are taking CTE related courses. Those are the students that we put out a call to the academies and the different schools across the region to say, we're looking to hire your students to work with us to be able to move our summer camps forward. So during the summer, from June to August, we offer summer camps around engineering, coding, cybersecurity, 3D printing, rocketry, and we've also added app design and crime forensics to our long list of summer camps that we offer. And we hire these high school and college students to work for us in a variety of ways to support the work that we're doing. One thing that's a great sell to these students, we do offer them a competitive hourly wage. The money that we raise from the tuition that's paid for the summer camps goes toward covering the cost of the supplies and the instructors. So we hire them on sort of a contractor basis. And it's certainly more money than they would make taking some type of retail job or swimming instructor position. They're actually able to take the skills that they're learning in class and apply them to teaching other students over the summer. And these students do work across all the campuses and subject areas that I just outlined below. Next slide. So we recruit these students not just from Nova. We hire Nova students, but we also hire students from across the Commonwealth. So we've got an impact across the entire state. We'll get students from Virginia Tech, VCU, George Mason, UVA, who when they return back to Northern Virginia during the summer, they're looking for these experiences. And they're also competing with students who are locally looking for those work-based experiences. So we found this as a great way to hire them across a variety of roles that both give them the experience and have a long-term impact for us as well. So these students come to the table ready to help us with curriculum development, teacher training. They also work as assistant instructors at our camps, as you see in some of the pictures. And also, believe it or not, some of these students are actually doing project management. They help us determine how do we get our equipment for our computers that we're doing for our cyber camps from one site to the next. They help coordinate and organize the equipment in our storage space so that it's organized in such a way the supplies get replenished so we can turn that equipment over when the camp ends on Friday in one county. We move the equipment over to the next county on Monday. And our instructors, our student instructors, are intimately involved in that process and are definitely instrumental in helping our small team make this happen over the summer. The big thing that I would like to stress about this is although we're not at the K-12 level, what they're doing for us over the summer supports our ongoing K-12 engagement during the school year. Because of the curriculum that they're developing and the teacher training that they're giving, because we also have teachers who work with us, we're then able to share the curriculum from our summer camps with the school district so that they can use it in the classrooms. And the teachers are getting training through us during the summer, which definitely is a benefit to the school districts. And I would be remiss to say that one of our biggest challenges is keeping these students after they work for us for a summer. A large number of those students will end up getting an industry internship or full-time employment after college as a result of their engagement in our summer program. We definitely our program allows us to provide a valuable referral. So when these students are looking for future employment opportunities, this is one of the ways that they can validate that they've got some of those skills that you all have talked about, such as teamwork, collaboration, communication. They're learning all of that through the different roles that I've outlined above. And as I mentioned, I think this is my last slide. I'm happy to answer any questions or furtherly engage the audience at the end of the webinar.
All right. Well, thank you, Charles and Ann, for sharing your practices in Virginia, the awesome things going on. So next, we're going to get to hear from a leader in my state of Washington, Maud Didon, who is the executive leader of Career Connect Washington. Welcome, Maud.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
You sound great.
Okay, thanks, MJ. So want to tell you a little bit about an initiative that our governor is in the middle of of driving forward, along with a lot of other legislators and leaders in education and business and so on in our state. And it's really to create a vision for how we want to scale Career Connect learning in our state. So if we could move forward. The key thing when you start a strategic planning opportunity is what are we trying to address? What's going on that we're trying to fix here? And in our state, we have a lot of great jobs. We're expecting 740,000 jobs in the next 5 years. And we know from our employer base that they need about 70% of the candidates for these jobs to have a post-secondary credential. And today, only 31% of our high school students, that is students that come through the Washington system, earn a post-secondary credential, which results in a pretty large gap and drives the propensity of employers to seek talent outside of our state, which is fine to some degree, but we would love more students to have the opportunity in Washington state. Next. Lots and lots of players are involved in this work, but I want to highlight a couple. If you look at the upper left-hand quadrant, you see that this Business and Philanthropy Leadership Committee, the main reason the governor wanted me to do this work, I'm a former leader of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, their former president and CEO, is because he feels so strongly that business needs to lead this effort. And so that table is composed of industry sector leaders from all the sectors that are just a couple of boxes below that, who are committed to driving the plan forward, but also to convene their colleagues through these workshops to really understand better what is it going to take for employers to engage in this work, and what are they willing to do now to move that forward. We also have in the other boxes legislative stakeholders, labor stakeholders, folks that drive forward our education and government systems, including the State Board of Ed, of course, is involved, and a lot of different networks across the state that are actually going to be the key implementers of all of this. So we've done a lot of outreach with those networks to both learn what's going well, how the system both helps or hinders them, and that's all being fed into the strategic plan. Okay, next. There are a lot of programs in the state of Washington. We tend to be a very distributed state in terms of players and individuals who are making a big difference. All of these entities are critical to the success of this initiative. And a lot of our work on the strategic plan is to figure out how to embrace our many diverse programs, but also figure out how to create enough of a system that we can scale what's going on. So next. We learned a lot from going to Switzerland, and while all of us know that the United States is not Switzerland and our education system is clearly not Switzerland, we learned some stuff that we thought, hey, let's bring this back and make it part of our thinking here, especially for being aspirational and thinking over a long period of time. So what this shows you is that students in Switzerland actually stay on the same pathway until the end of 10th grade, and then they have a choice. And it's definitely a choice, not a test or a tracking approach, between the red part of this slide and the yellow, the red being applied learning or apprenticeship, the yellow being academic. On the apprenticeship side, they go into a job setting 3 days a week and have a academic part of their curriculum 2 days a week. And at the end of 3 years, they get to the same academic credential as a student who's chosen the yellow side, which is the straight academic side. They are equivalent degrees. They're viewed as equivalent degrees by employers, peers, educators, you name it. We met all kinds of folks at the highest levels of their industry sector, whether it was government, education, or business, who basically had come, they were sort of indifferent which side of this they'd come up, but they would brag about whichever side it was and embrace the full system. So what we liked about the system was this. It was a choice-based system, it was permeable, and at the end of that high school diploma, you could go anywhere, and there was no tracking at the end of it either, so full permeability. So going forward, we will dream a little bit as we put this together on where we want to be in 10 years. What is our vision for Washington State? And then how do we actually work on our system to make sure that year by year by year we're making progress towards that vision as robustly as possible. We're creating a 10-year growth plan to do that, a funding model, because we do believe it has to be self-sufficient, and a governance model, meaning a body to hold all accountable to actually achieve the vision. We know that over this time frame, there'll be different people in different seats, and it's going to be important to have a steady voice to keep this rolling forward. Lastly, we will have a very robust engagement and communications plan, as we all know, and one of the things that differentiates us from European models and other models is that we have a sense that if you do the career-connected side, it's less than the academic side. So not only do we need to make sure that the curriculum and the certifications that we provide to students get to equivalency, but we also need to make sure that we are communicating some of the opportunities that this presents to students to parents, teachers, and leaders of our education system, and that they fully are part of promoting this themselves, that it's not something imposed from that side. So, next. Early work, we're still midstream. Our plan is done in October, so right now we're in the creation phase. But early work would be our vision. In 10 years, every young adult in Washington will have multiple pathways towards economic self-sufficiency, strengthened by a comprehensive statewide system for career-connected learning. I think the words here are basically saying it's choice-based for students, and also it is embedded in our education system. If we can go to the next slide. I want to start with the top of this pyramid, which talks about lifelong learning and work. And I've heard other speakers reference this as well. We're in a very shifting and very swiftly changing work environment, as everybody knows. What work is will probably evolve every 5 years, if not faster, as technology changes. And the purpose of this, in part, is to prepare and train students in Washington to embrace that and also look at this pathway I'll describe in a minute as an ongoing life journey, not as a singular degree and done approach. So the idea is a pyramid, which I'm sure I saw another pyramid. It looks a lot like this one, which was great to see, is that you start with this career awareness, which could be things like going to a job fair or going to a worksite visit. You climb a little bit higher when you actually do a deep dive into a specific career option, like a job shadowing experience. For career preparation and not job, this could be an internship. It might be a paid internship. It might not be a paid internship. It might give you high school credit. It might not give you high school credit. But the idea is to really get some hands-on experience and gain a little bit of skill in a particular occupation. Career launch, we look at as the gold standard. This is a opportunity that would provide meaningful on-the-job experience and related classroom learning to give you a credential beyond high school, as well as be a competitive job candidate. So it is literally launching you into post-secondary or career, or both, which is often the case here in Washington with some of our stellar programs that provide on-the-job educational opportunity, as well as you know, obviously a good family living wage job. So I believe, let's go one more slide and see. Oh, okay. I've forgotten, we actually give you examples here of the different levels of the pyramid. So if you look at the career launch, we're looking at registered apprenticeships. We have many of these in Washington State. It's a huge help to have a robust history of doing registered apprenticeships. However, they have largely been in the trades, or almost exclusively. About 90% of them are in construction-related activities. So we're trying to also identify how to spread that across new sectors. In fact, this afternoon we're doing a very big push towards a healthcare apprenticeship statewide, starting here in January. We also, if you go to the right, you know, there are CTC programs, career and technical college programs, that require work-based learning that could qualify for this, for those criteria I shared with you a minute ago for the career launch. Also CTE, in some cases, does the same thing. There are four-year programs with our research and independent colleges and public universities that enable this sort of career launch activity. And we're really hoping in the last box that we'll see a lot of innovation in this space. We are not trying to be prescriptive. We're trying to be hopefully supportive and make it easy for employers to engage here, educators to engage here, and students to engage here and design the way that makes sense for their particular occupation or region in the state. Career preparation, I don't need to walk you through each of those, but there's many examples of what career prep can look like, including the internship example I gave you a minute ago, and so on. Okay, next. This is a more detailed definition of what career launch is, and I won't dwell on this one, but I think, you know, again, to reinforce, it takes a number of factors, meaningful on-the-job experience, relevant classroom learning, to become that competitive candidate and have that post-high school credential, which we think actually is in that category of launching someone onto a pathway. Next. How do we measure this? So it's always a question mark. We are again in process here, but starting back at the, I guess referring back to the beginning of this slide deck, the first metric is about trying to increase post-high school credential attainment. So we ought to see a movement there. We also think we'll see a decrease in youth unemployment or an increase in youth employment, which is now running about double what it is for the rest of the population. We also hope to see increased economic mobility. The median household income will rise in our state. And we'll be able to fill those 740,000 jobs I talked about with Washington State students, which hopefully will continue to drive economic prosperity here, allowing companies to remain in our state and not have to relocate elsewhere. Next. So in June, we're doing our midpoint check-in with our governor, with all the stakeholders involved. And during the rest of the year, we'll be building out our recommendations for governance, for funding, and to actually get that action plan together, which will outline not necessarily exactly what the solutions will be year by year, but instead what needs to get solved year by year, with a very robust plan for the first year of things that we will recommend some changes in immediately, and some programs that will scale up that are currently here, and some new things that will launch as a result of this initiative. Next. Okay, I think that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Maud, for sharing what's going on in our state, Washington. All of our states are doing such amazing things here, so it's great to hear. So we're going to go into some discussion time now, and the topics of the discussion are shown, as you can see on this slide. Hopefully, we're going to have time to talk about, equitable access to the opportunities in your states. Your interagency coordination and collaboration, as well as the alignment with graduation requirements and post-secondary pathways, other indicators of success, and employer engagement. And I know most of you touched on a lot of these, but I think it would be good to kind of reiterate it, and sum it up for our participants today. And I just welcome this. It's kind of meant to be a pretty free-form engagement, so I'm not going to call on you. Just invite you to jump in with your responses to these questions. And I also want to invite Chris and Randy to join us back on too, to maybe bring in any points of interest for them or questions that they may have as well. So first question for discussion. For our panelists today, how do you address equitable access to these opportunities? Who would like to start?
This is Lefty from Louisiana. I'll just take a quick run at that one. We're a poor state, and like many states, we're going through a budget crisis. Ours is particularly protracted and severe, although I know there are other states that have the same situation. And we have a lot of students who go to school in remote places where there are, and sometimes in towns, not even an employer of any size other than a convenience store. And so if we don't make workplace-based learning available to students using technology and different times of the year, they could go their entire K through 12 educational experience without having any insight as to what the world might offer them. And so we use the NEPRIS platform, which is low cost, and which we give incentives to the schools to do that by giving them the ability to embed that in courses that earn that career development funding, $238 per student per credit. So it becomes sort of like a workplace-based learning becomes a profit center for them. And we also do that by developing curricular resources for them, because we found that to maintain quality and rigor, but also just to get the ball rolling, you need to create those materials for teachers to use. You can't really rely on them to use it. The only other thing I'll say is that we spent a lot of time collaborating with industry during the development and deployment of Jumpstart. That's happened over the last 4 years. My experience has been that except for the most affluent of employers who can staff education outreach independently, that there's a fatigue among employers, that they expect at some point their contribution to result in transformative initiatives, and for those transformative initiatives to take root on their own. So we've taken responsibility for doing that, and we don't expect or require long-term industry engagement other than trying to get our workforce development boards to set local goals for the pathways that schools support, so that schools don't do what they reflexively do, which is what's familiar, easy, and cheap, but they in fact do what's best for student opportunities aligned to adult success. Now, I said a lot there, but the key is we try to make things inexpensive. We try to offer matching funding sources. We try to give implementation resources, and we try to do it in a way of independent of sustained employer engagement.
Awesome. Thanks, Lefty. Anyone else want to speak?
It's Maud. I'll jump in if that's okay. I think in Washington State, we've long had a philosophy that when we're talking about equal access, we're talking about it for all students. And that's pretty much across the board for our educational institutions. But how that actually gets implemented always has, is always the devil in the details. In this case, we're very mindful. If we were looking at my presentation a minute ago in the pyramid, the very base of the pyramid, it talks about student enablers and supporting needs. And that really is a big category that it requires dissecting, because it's everything from great counseling for students, as well as things like transportation. Sometimes it can engage childcare. Sometimes it is, as you just mentioned, the previous speaker mentioned, the rural-urban divide that can exist, and trying to make that less of a barrier through online learning, et cetera. So I think, you know, again, in each state it's going to be slightly different, but paying attention to those things is super important. I can tell you that as we are setting our goals here, our aspirations for what is that going to look like in 10 years, we're talking about having virtually all of the pyramids, except for the career launch, be 100% participation on all students. I think this is very important that each student gets that exposure, no matter where they live in the state, no matter what their family circumstances, no matter, you know, what their academic situation is, whether they're a high academic achiever or they're struggling. So that all really will mean all. And then at the career launch level, we're really targeting about 60% of our students having that opportunity to get exposed at that very deep level to a career. So that means special outreach to lots of populations. And the last thing I will say is that there's work on the employer side of it, because if you're preparing all students to have careers, then employers need to be ready to engage every possible candidate in their place of work. And that means sometimes being willing to hire someone who doesn't have a conventional background, that may not have that particular degree that they've always put into the job description. So there's a lot of discussion going on here with employers about what we mean when we're talking about alternative pipelines and pathways that are just as trained, in a sense even more trained specifically to curriculum that employers support, and that can make terrific employees that may not be their traditional job description candidates. And I think, you know, we're beginning to get a lot of traction around that discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Maud. Yeah, this is such an important topic because I think as probably many of our states that are here, I know for Washington, you know, we have amazing practices across the state, but not everywhere, right? There's these pockets of brilliance and these opportunities for our students, but it's just not equitable for every student. And so I think as we wrestle with this as our states, it'll be great to share, you know, how are we addressing this equitable access, because we really do, as you all have said, all means all, right? So let's move on to our next question, unless anybody else wants to chime in there. What's your process for coordination and integration across the multiple agencies? So of course we've got, you know, K-12 education, higher education, CTE, workforce development, but how are you helping to coordinate those that are involved in those work-based learning opportunities for students?
This is Carrie from Indiana. We've created kind of a task force. We call it a super group just to make ourselves feel good. But what we really do is we have people from workforce development, from the Commission of Higher Education, so our post-secondary, our K-12, as well as our community college representatives, and then some of our local intermediaries who are actually delivering the work and facilitating, expanding work-based learning into the communities. And so we have this meeting of the minds, and we just kind of check the pulse on what we're doing. The goal right now is to operationalize the graduation pathways and make sure that those pathways are accessible and equitable across the state. So that's the main goal for the group meeting, but we've all made a commitment. I kind of took this idea from John Dunn in California with their Office of Apprenticeship, that he gets everyone together with the same goal in mind, and they just kind of make sure they're touching base to make sure that no one's making a decision that's going to impact the whole system.
Great. Awesome. Anyone else want to jump in there on how you're addressing working across the multi-agencies in your state? And it sounds like, I think a lot of states have these kind of, like you called it, Carrie, super group, or, you know, a task force that's focusing on this. And I think it's also interesting at how that's playing out in the local level as well. You made reference to it, Carrie. I know that's something they're doing in Washington State as well. Is we've got this big statewide system task force, but then also, you know, making sure that we have these regional, more localized groups that are pulling all those agencies together and making sure there's, you know, fidelity in implementation. So let's, and I know we're getting some good questions here on the chat box, and I just want to remind everybody, sure, add your questions along. I think that we've gotten a question from Randall about asking about the credentialing using the work-based learning experience as a state, the state system or the credential, and I think we'll address that here in an upcoming question. So let's go to question number 3. How do you align work-based learning with high school graduation requirements and post-secondary pathways? Perfectly. You keep that up for us, Randall. So go ahead. Who would like to start?
This is Lefty. Workplace-based learning courses, including the virtual workplace experience courses, are part of every Jumpstart pathway. And our requirements are that students take, I think it's 23 course credits. Among them have to be a selection of an academic foundation, 9 CTE courses, of which 1 has to be an approved soft skills course, and the student has to be qualified to earn that industry promulgated, industry valued industry-based credential. But there is no limit as to the number of internship, co-op, or other WBL credits that they can apply towards their graduation.
So Lefty, you said that one of the CTE credits has to be a work-based learning experience? Is that right?
No, one has to be a soft skills course, a career readiness course, which can be one where WBL is heavily integrated. And we are continuing to develop new generations of soft skill courses that increasingly include WBL elements. But then there are courses like co-ops or internships, which can pay students while they earn academic credits, or the virtual workplace experience courses. And all of those can be counted towards any Jumpstart pathway. They're called universal courses.
Very nice. How about Virginia? And Charles, we haven't heard from you yet. Do you have anything to add?
This is Anne. I'll chime in with, yes, we have aligned with graduation requirements in that both requiring that every student be offered a work-based learning opportunity before graduation, but also, as I began to say earlier, giving our schools more flexibility in terms of taking some of the requirements away that were preventing students from completing CTE sequence of courses. For instance, we had so many course requirements for our advanced diploma that it was almost impossible to complete a CTE sequence along with meeting those requirements. One of the things we're doing to help encourage the work-based learning, and this kind of gets to a number of the other questions as well, but I'll just go ahead and jump in, is starting with, again, with the freshman class that enters this fall, we will have, as part of our state accreditation system, which is basically our ESSA plan plus our Virginia specific requirements, we will have what we're calling as one of the criteria that all our schools are measured, all our high schools are measured on, a college and career readiness index. And that index will measure the percentage of high school graduates that have either an AP credit or a dual enrollment credit or a CTE completer credit or a work-based learning credit. And the CTE completer basically means you have to have taken a sequence of CTE courses and gotten an industry recognized credential. And so both that and the work-based learning will both be counted in the numerator, along with students who receive AP credits or dual enrollment credits the denominator being the number of graduates. And so by incentivizing, and that's one of the indicators that will be used to measure whether schools are, how much intervention they get from the state on an ESSA-like system of continuous school improvement. So to be at the very top of that system, they'll have to make sure that 85% of students are in one of those three categories, having had a genuine work-based learning experience, or a CTE completer experience, or advanced placement credit. So it's a pretty broad definition, and we're giving our local divisions a lot of flexibility, but we are giving them guidance, and we do have some measurements that are hopefully going to help keep them on track.
Awesome. I think you kind of touched on that, you know, a little bit of the next question on the measures of success, but I really appreciate you sharing that, Anne, because I think that's something I know we've been wrestling with, is how do you value, you know, these experiences, especially like in a system-wide indicator like the ESSA or the index for your state. So let's kind of move into that next question, because I'd like to hear from other states as well. What are your indicators or measures of success, and how will your state express value in this work? You know, what we value is where the system's going to move to. And then will these indicators be used as local, state, and or federal measures, federal system measures in a cycle of review and or continuous improvement?
And MJ, if I can just jump in, this is Anne still before I turn over to others, that I do think when you think about using a CTE credential as a measure of success, you do have to be a little careful, because we have had now a system in effect that gave schools credit for that for some time now. And lo and behold, you know, 73% of our students earn a CTE credential, but let's just say there are some credentials that are worth more than other credentials. And so this notion, I think Louisiana was talking about industry recognized or other particular valuable credentials, but being thoughtful about just how good does a CTE credential have to be to count is worth doing.
Yeah, this is Lefty. Amen to that. And thankfully, the Department of Education in Louisiana isn't called upon to make that determination. So nobody has to lobby us, or the lobbying would be incessant. We have a separate body under law, the Workforce Investment Council, whose mission it is to interact with employers and to get from them the credentials that they will accept for entry-level applicants. And so divorcing the determination of which IBCs are accepted from the department bureaucracy, the education department bureaucracy, I think is a really good check and balance that makes sure that there isn't this rash of low-value credentials flooding the education system.
Very good. Does anybody else want to address this question for your state? Indiana. All right. Well, let's move on to our last question, and then we'll kind of see if there's any other questions that our participants might have. How are your employers engaged in this work?
This is Carrie from Indiana. Our employers, we have an employer engagement team that, you know, we have with the Department of Workforce Development, are constantly working with our workforce boards, and we firmly believe, and I forget which other state said it, maybe it was Virginia or Washington, that had said that this has to be an employer-led activity in terms of addressing the needs that they have, and it can't be as successfully led from a school is my perspective. So, you know, walking employers through and letting them feel heard and letting them know that there's a solution to the problem and helping them think outside the box. That's where we've seen the most success, is really when this is an employer-led initiative and they have some skin in the game. That's where we've seen some really, like I've said, out-of-the-box programs for our students, particularly in the K-12 setting. So having a team of individuals focused on that employer piece has been game-changing for us, and it really is the driving factor to make things happen.
This is,
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry. This is Susie from Louisiana. I just wanted to reiterate something that Lefty said in terms of a little bit of sensitivity beyond between, I think, whether something's employer-led or whether it's employer-responsive. And I think one of the things that we have found, as Lefty said, is a lot of fatigue on the part of our employers who are feeling called upon in a lot of different venues to take charge of something that they're not necessarily an expert in. And I think we're all doing the same thing here. I just want to reiterate it, that what we're doing is being facilitators and allowing the employer input to come in, but we're not putting the entire burden of program creation, delivery, implementation on them. I think that's a really vital distinction.
Yeah, this is Maud, and just jumping right on that point, I was just going to say something very similar. We had a previous phase of this work that was a Career Connect Washington task force, and it was a task force that basically put employers in the mix with government, education, labor, and pretty soon employers just started to drift away because honestly their needs are what they're at the table to fulfill, and you want them there because you're actually serving a need for them, not because it's a social cause for them, although that's a great ancillary benefit. It's got to really meet a demand that they have for talent. And so what we found is that they really don't care that much about how the sausage is made on the government and education side of this, although they do care a lot about the quality that emerges. So their role in sort of reviewing curriculum and making sure that that the competencies and the skills are well defined, that they're going to be that students are going to be educated into. But you know, how the systems actually work is less of interest to them, and actually it can really turn them off. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that I think they're asked, I mean, as soon as we got a comment back from one of our surveys of employers, or when we were doing a lot of outreach with them, that once they express interest in this, like 6 million people get a hold of them. And it's not a particularly focused conversation. So figuring out how to make this really easy for an employer so that they're not inundated, that there's contact at the appropriate level at the appropriate time, that they're not asked to sit at multiple tables, but they're asked to sit at the right table or tables, is super important because you can actually, again, have the unintended consequence of making them feel like, wow, this is just too complicated for me and I am checking out of it. I can't do this anymore. So designing around their needs, I think, is super important.
Hi, and this is Charles from Virginia. I will say here in Northern Virginia, we rely heavily and leverage the input that comes from employers. It was one of our largest employers, Micron Technologies in Manassas, Virginia, that helped to spearhead our regional program by, advocating with the General Assembly down in Richmond to get funding to create this model that we would hope could replicate across the state, that in communities and places across the Commonwealth, community colleges could serve as a conduit for increasing the teacher development, teacher professional development, and expansion of STEM outreach programs that support connecting students to work-based learning opportunities. All of our summer camps and programs that we do throughout the year, we get input from employers about what we should be teaching. I think one of the challenges that is very unique to our area is that I think Ann mentioned some of the numbers. Just in Fairfax County alone, we have 180,000 students, of which plus 40,000 plus are taking a CTE-related course. So it's very difficult to put 40,000 students out into the workforce to get some type of workplace learning experience when you factor in Washington, D.C. traffic, government security clearances, and a lot of other things that kind of limit our ability to put that many students out into the market. And that's why this is one of the ways that we're leveraging our relationships with the school district and with the local chambers of commerce to find out these unique ways that these students can get these experiences. And something that we're also now investigating in Fairfax County is using projects that problems that industry is experiencing and turning them into projects that the students would work on in the classroom with the teacher, that would then in turn be considered a work-based learning experience, something that's a little bit different, but it allows us to be able to take a problem or a challenge and put it into several schools and allow multiple children to get that experience.
This is Ann, also chiming in from Virginia. I just sent a link on the chat to the Hampton Academies program that I mentioned earlier. One of the things I think they've done a great job partnering with their businesses, but they've defined businesses pretty broadly. So for instance, one of their local employers that has a lot of needs that they're having a hard time filling with the current workforce is law enforcement and firefighters and EMTs. So they were some of their original very, very strong partners was local law enforcement and the firefighter world. And so some of those government employers may be a good starting point. The other thing I wanted to mention is we do have some of our chambers of commerce, the one particularly here in our capital city, the Chamber RVA, that has really stepped up to the plate in a role of thinking of themselves as the intermediary between the K-12 world and the school divisions. And this is sort of in an early stage. They've been running a very successful, very large interactive career fair for middle school students for several years now, where they get 12,000 kids through this career fair every fall. But they're now stepping up to a new role of trying to bridge the gap between employers who want to engage in work-based learning partnerships with the K-12 world, or who are at least willing to consider it, and the K-12 world and their needs. So I do think it helps to have an intermediary of some sort, and I think the chambers are a natural, and I think we should expect a lot of them. They've been telling us they need all these folks for their workforce, and I think we should, and I hear you, some of you who are farther along may have gotten to the point of overloading them a little, but here in Virginia, we need to be asking more of the business community.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I know we've got a couple questions here that we haven't been able to get to, and we've just got like maybe 1 minute. I'm going to ask one quick question, and then those questions that we don't get to, we'll follow up with our presenters and post those answers on the website along with the other information that's been shared today. But one of the questions, and I think this is a great question, is it possible for folks to share whether they have seen more students pursue an academic credential through the expansion of work-based learning opportunities in high school, like an AA or an AS or a bachelor's?
Well, it's Maud. I can't speak to data on this, but I can tell you anecdotally that everywhere I go in this state and I see these kinds of programs in action, I hear from students directly that this inspires them to go on to achieve a greater sort of post-secondary attainment goal than they had previously. It's amazing. It doesn't matter if they're an academic kid or a non-academic kid. They all have said, I now see the relevance of what I was learning, and I now believe I need to continue my education. And whether I do that through an employer or on my own, I see the need to do that, and I'm excited about doing that. So that's totally anecdotal and not data-based.
And this is Lefty in Louisiana. Different states have different cultures about gathering data and tracking students. And while I am wildly optimistic about the ability to help every kid engage with industry experts in every industry sector that they're interested in exploring, I am less optimistic about our ability to be allowed under law to gather data to show outcomes. And that's a conversation for another webinar.
A very important one, though. I know a lot of us are wrestling with that, Lefty. So great point. Great point. Well, I think that's a great question and answer to kind of end on, talking about, how this plays out for our students and their experience. And I'd have to reiterate what Maud said. I know I've had the opportunity to talk to some high school students that have done some youth apprenticeship programs in the high school. And it just seems like what their experience has just given them such a why that it's just great, and they just launch from there. So again, I want to just thank our panelists today, Carrie and Beth from Indiana, Dave or Lefty, and Susie from Louisiana, Ann and Charles from Virginia, and Maud from Washington State, as well as Randy from Washington State Board of Education, and Chris from NASBE, and thank all of our participants for joining us today. We did record this webinar, and it will be available along with additional information at the Washington State Board of Education website. I'm sure they'll list that there here in just a second in the chat box. And then just a reminder, if we didn't get to your questions, we will definitely get those answered for you, and we'll post those as well with the website. And you can also send additional questions to Linda Drake, and she'll convey those to the panelists and get those answered for you. And her email address is also on the chat box. And I just want to remind you, don't forget to join us tomorrow for the second part of this series at 2 o'clock to 3:30 Eastern Time, or 11 o'clock on the West Coast. We're going to be hearing from our remainder states of Colorado, Delaware, Kentucky, and an additional leader from the state of Washington in the Career Connect learning space. So again, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today, and I hope you have a great day.